Good evening. I'd like to welcome all of you to this regular board business meeting of the Loveland School Board. I call this meeting to order at 6:01 p.m. And can we have a roll call, please?
Reverend Eiler,
Here.
Mrs. Jaranek,
Here.
Mrs. Mangan,
Here.
Dr. Swetchenow,
We'll be here momentarily.
Mrs. Washburn.
Here.
Thank you. Let's stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Yes, thank you. Good to see the flag as well. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. All right, the board agenda went out end of last week, as usual. Do we have a motion to approve the agenda as presented?
I'll second.
Roll call, please.
Mrs. Jaranek,
Yes.
Mrs. Mangan,
Yes.
Mrs. Washburn,
Yes.
Reverend Eiler.
Yes. Thank you. Then minutes, we have minutes from our February 4th Board of Ed work session. Any additions and corrections to the minutes as presented? And do we have a motion to approve the minutes as presented?
So moved. And second?
Roll call, please.
Mrs. Mangan,
Yes.
Dr. Swetchenow,
Yes.
Mrs. Washburn,
Yes.
Reverend Eiler,
Yes.
Mrs. Jaranek.
Yes.
Thank you. All right. Welcoming of guests for today. We have a few guests, a few of our administrators are here, and we even have a canine friend here with us today. So glad to have you here. And we'll be hearing from our administrators in a little bit here. Hearing of the public. Anyone for a hearing of the public?
We have none.
Okay, thank you. Then Dr. Puerta is going to come forward and give us a little introduction for our report card presentations from LPS and LES.
There we go. Oh, yeah, now it's on. Good evening. So tonight we have report card presentations from LPS and LES. You've already heard the district-wide one, and then last month we had LECC and LHS. Tonight we have Mr. Fancher with us and Ms. Foran with us and Ms. Cameron as well. And they're going to present on their report cards at LPS and LES, but also because they don't have a whole lot of metrics in their report card, they're going to share some of their other data as well, some of their iReady and MTSS data. So, and then next month, just to preview, we'll have LIS and LMS here just to kind of finish things off. So, Mr. Fancher, you want to go first?
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to come and talk with you. For Loveland Primary School, our report card, you can go to the next slide, whoever's. The report card, as you'll see, there's most of the categories are non-reportable. We have two components that impact our overall rating. And the first is gap closing and the second is the early literacy component. So you can go to the next slide. The first one, gap closing, 5 stars. That's really something for us to be proud of. That is one of the 2 indicators that we do have, but it doesn't really say a whole lot for our building, so that's why we're going to share a little bit of a snapshot of some of the other data. So the gap closing, really, if you want to understand how we got the 5 stars, is really on the next slide. So the top, you get 5 possible points right there in that first metric, and it's chronic absenteeism. So when we talk about attendance, we have attendance reviews every month. LPS earned 5 points out of the 5 points possible. And then when you go down, it looks like maybe 4. There's a gifted identification and services box. 5 points possible, but we get 0 points on that. And the reason why we get that is because we don't currently serve gifted populations in 2nd grade. We'll come back to that in just a second. And then the last one that we do get points on is the English learner proficiency score there. That is our ELL population. We got 5 possible points. We earned 5 points. On the previous slide, you saw 10.7% improvement in that area from prior year. That's how we get those 5 points possible. The gifted one, LPS has been slow to do the gifted training because we've been inundated with other trainings that are required by the state. So the first thing that our teachers experienced was a mandate for them to be trained in dyslexia. It was 18 hours of additional training outside of our PD plans that we already had in place, plus implementation of curriculum, including Being a Reader, our new core program for reading. Once we finished dyslexia training, right on the heels of that, the state required us to do science of reading training, which we completed, and we have everybody completed by, I think, June of this year. So now that we have those big trainings behind us, we are actually, Dr. Porta and I have put a plan in place with our second grade team to start capturing some of those points back for gifted by getting our second grade team trained. So this year, we're completing 15 of the hours required. The goal is to have everyone finished by June 30th, I believe. Dr. Porta. And then they will have to do 15 more hours for the next 3 years. And then once we get those hours completed, it's 4 hours, I believe, for the next, no, it's 3 hours per year from then on. So working, that's a heavy lift for us in addition to what we're already doing, but we're hoping to capture some of that. Right now, the gifted measure doesn't negatively impact our score. So we got 5 points out of that gap closing. 5 stars, I mean, because we get 66.7 as you saw. But if our English language learner population or our chronic absenteeism, if we lost any points there, we could definitely lose a star or so. So we really would love to capture those gifted points, but also empower our teachers to better serve that population.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, ma'am.
So as we're working toward that, are we able to begin processes to begin gifted, or do we have to have that certain completion done by?
So that
June?
Stacey, do you know?
Working towards it, we'll get credit for it, so it should be reflected in this year.
That was a good question because I had the same question. I didn't know if we had to finish all 45 of those hours, if we
Right.
could start with the 15. So. So then the second component that LPS has on the state report card is the early literacy component rating. And there's basically 3 measures that a lot of elementary schools use. Because Loveland is a grade level cluster school, I only have first and second grade right in my building. 100% of our early literacy component rating is based on the improving K-3 literacy. So when Jen gets to hers, you'll see that hers is weighted differently. 100% of the weight is on improving K-3 literacy. The way you do that for LPS, you only get to look at first grade students in the fall to second grade students, that same group, the following fall. So we measure how our students do on the state diagnostic for literacy in August and September, then it's reported to the state. That same group of students we look at after 9 months of school year, 3 months of summer, however they move and come in to us in the fall. If we've put them on a trajectory to be on track, we get points for that. So when you look at the next slide, you're going to see 22 out of our 31 students moved from off track to on track, 71%, which is phenomenal. We've struggled in this area because of that measure. It's very challenging to do. We've had 4 stars, we've had 2 stars. Ever since we put in place the summer Jumpstart reading program and our summer book exchange program, we really haven't looked back. We've gotten 3 stars or better. 3 stars is really amazing. I think we'll probably fluctuate between a 3 and 4 stars if we're somehow remarkable. Maybe one year we'll get a 5 star in this area, but in general, LPS only gets that by moving those kids, which are the most challenging kids to move, from off track, 9 months of school, 3 months of summer, on track. You can get points for all the other ones, but because once they move buildings, the building itself doesn't get credit for that. So once second graders leave my building and go to Jen's building as third graders, they might do amazingly well in that third grade diagnostic, but LPS will never get credit for those because once the IRN number for the building changes, that building no longer gets credit. Same thing true for the first grade incoming. If once they leave Matt's building, you don't get credit for those students. So then this
I'm
next
sorry.
one really is, what
Mr.
does that
Cranswick,
look like?
I apologize. Just to reiterate that and kind of beat a dead horse. The reason that we score more poorly than we would otherwise is purely a function of how we grade our buildings, how we grade band our building.
It just makes it more challenging.
I mean, we have a year less of measurements than other districts.
Correct. And no matter what profession you kind of apply it to, it usually takes more time than just 6 or 9 months. Because once you get those routines, you're cutting that school year down. Really, you could say 9 months, but we're not really even present for 9 months. So by the time you present, give routines, get interventions in place, you're looking at solid instruction of 7 months, and then you got 3 months to make sure no summer slide happens for the most challenging students. And this is really what you'll see. The board is usually used to seeing a year's worth of growth in a year's worth of time, right? This year, what we're looking at is half year's growth. So on the screen, what you see on the left side there is the beginning of the last school year compared to the beginning of this school year on the right and our mid-year on the far right. So when you look at that, it's just a snapshot. Ames Web is a 1-minute probe. It's kind of like blood pressure when you go to the doctor. It's looking at one indicator of your overall health. Ames Web is one indicator of your reading health. And so when we take our students, what we're looking for at the building level is we want to see the right movement. We want to see that group of red students shrinking, the group of yellow students shrinking, and the group of green growing. One of the things I will share and point out with the board is that when you look at last year's number, we had 36% of our students, the bottom parentheses there underneath the school year is percents. We had 36% of our students in intensive, red, coming in the door. This year we got 26%. That's a pretty large reduction, and I think it's accredited to the board committing to extra reading services at LECC. So in general, it's not significantly different. Like at the beginning of the year, it doesn't scare us that we have 53% of our kids at benchmark. It's comparable to what we've seen for several years. But it does look better that we don't have so many tier 3 intensive students and that we can actually touch kids who are what we call bubble kids that are in that tier 2 program. So what I'm looking for as the instructional leader are our kids moving in the right direction. And you can see 26% at the beginning of the school year were in intensive, 19% mid-year. The benchmark doesn't stay the same. It's not static, it moves. So kids, in order to move out of red, they have to hit that mid-year benchmark, which is higher than the beginning of the year benchmark. So if you go to the next slide, this is really drilling down a little bit, and it's just a snapshot for grade 1. If you look at our left-hand side there, fall, 85 students, 29% of our kids were tier 3. On the right, it shows you what happens to that group of kids. 53 of the 85 students stayed as our tier 3 intensive kids. 17 of those students moved to tier 2, or what we call approaching. 12 blew right past that and hit the mid-year benchmark. So they had to read from 20 words per minute to 38 words per minute. So intensive kids making that's tremendously great. If you look at the 40 in the middle there that were yellow, the 14%, 4 of those kids are now intensive. We don't like that movement, but it's expected. 17 of them stayed, but 19 of those moved to benchmark. So the benchmark, again, rising throughout the school year, and our kids hitting that. 159 of our kids that were established, hitting the benchmarks, continued to hit the benchmarks. 3 of those bubble students are now tier 2. So to me, as the building principal, what I want to see is that continuing throughout our building data. If you look at the next slide, it's just second grade Ames Web, very comparable. But what you continue to see is that benchmark at the bottom, 66% of our kids hitting benchmark in the fall to 71% mid-year. What I will say from the building perspective, we are situated to have a picture-perfect cone at the end of the school year. We've hit this before, and when we do that, we hit a picture-perfect cone. So the state of Ohio says school improvement, the model, if you can get that red to be 5% or less of your kids, you're doing amazing. The yellow should be 15% or less of your kids. The green should be 75 to 80% of our kids. We're getting very close on this one measure. So then as we carry that through the other measures, what does it look like? If you take a look at the next slide, this is our being a reader data. And it actually looks better than our Ames Web data, which is actually, so Ames Web is that blood pressure. Being a reader is putting it all together, applying it in reading group with teachers and where kids at instructionally. Started out with 69% of our kids at the benchmark at the beginning of the school year. already at 71%. And what is most important to me is looking at the red, because once we get kids out of the red, they take off. If I can get kids into the yellow, I know I'm going to get them to green by the end of the school year. So that red coming down to 23 kids, 9% of our kids, that's why I say we're on track to have a picture perfect come by the end of the school year. Take a look at second grade being a reader. It's even more impressive. To be honest, I have 61 kids at our most intensive, 20% of our kids to now 12% is incredible. Our second grade staff, our reading intervention teachers working very hard to get those results. Any questions for LPS?
Looking back, when you were talking about success of the LECC, spending more time and more effort in the intervention there and more people at investments. So in terms of them thinking about for first graders, how much more time, you've got less kids that are in the red than coming in, how much more time are our intervention specialists first grade able to spend with our kids given day? I mean, I'm sure you can't exactly quantify in general.
Well, Reverend Eiler, if I understand the question right, it's like minutes with kids specifically. If you can get students out of tier 3 and into tier 2, tier 2 typically is 30 minutes a day of specialized instruction in addition to the core. So they're getting reading group with their classroom teacher, but then they're getting specialized instruction with the reading intervention teacher. If they're in tier 3, it's 40 to 45 minutes. So giving a reading teacher back 15 minutes, if you can do that from 2 groups instead of the 1, you can get an extra tier 2 group in, which allows us to really strengthen kids who are right on the bubble. And this year, we're pretty much picking up every student that doesn't have both measures, Part A and Part B scores established. So if you're established in one area but not established in the other, we're going to pick you up in reading intervention. So an indicator of that, we had 23 new students that we picked up mid-year because of the transition data that I previously showed where kids didn't quite make the benchmark, so they fell on one of the 2 different measures that we use. But we had 16 exit. So we had a lot of kids by mid-year, which is a ton of growth in a half year's time, especially when you talk about our first grade. We had 13 first graders exit out. They spent October, really is where their reading groups start. They spend September and August just learning how to be a student. Where's the pencil sharpener? Where's the box of tissues? And so getting into that growth and catching that up and then exiting out because they hit the benchmarks is pretty impressive too. Very proud of the intervention staff and the first grade teachers and second grade teachers I work with.
I know in the past, sometimes we've talked about this. One of the other challenges that has been brought up is the transience of students that, come in and out of the district. How's that looking these days? We still have a lot of kids kind of coming in and out. Is that still an ongoing challenge?
It is, and I talked to Mrs. Foran today because we were looking at the same thing, looking at our data. And we're digging into iReady a little bit, which I don't know a whole lot about yet because we're in implementation and we're still even in training. We have more training coming up in March. But what you see, if you look at a Loveland kid that walks in the door in LECC and is handed over to Jen, their growth is phenomenal. They're where they need to be. And oftentimes when they leave our campus, they're on track to be successful students for the rest of their educational journey. It's the students who move into Loveland that are really the challenge. And the other thing that we talked about probably around this time last year with the board is our English language learners. That is still a significant group of students. When you start talking about students in tier 3 and tier 2, we're talking, I think it's 18 of that 36 that are ELL learners in second grade, and in first grade, it's 11. So that's a large percentage of those students. And to be honest, in all fairness to them, they're learning the language, and we're teaching them to read the language while we're trying to get them to learn the vocabulary of the language. Very, very challenging and daunting task.
That's helpful context too.
So Kevin, just a quick comment. The kind of the earlier question that Reverend Eilert had is a great point in that, we opened up to where we have all day kindergarten, as many families that want to access it can, and then the preschool, we're adding a classroom next year. And the point being that earlier you can get to the interventions, get them off some of the interventions. Are you seeing a difference with the investment that's been made at the preschool or at LECC coming into first grade? And I hear your answer is yes.
Yes.
But it provides, like you had said, maybe one additional period that the teachers could work with some of the other students. But I think it's a great point. The earlier we can get the interventions with some of the students, the better. But you would kind of address that.
Well, one of the things that Mr. Patterson and I were looking at was that beginning of the year data with Ames Web, and why is there a discrepancy with like the benchmark and how close are we getting? And one of the things that in those conversations, Ames Web for first grade and second grade, they start putting it all together. They're measuring oral reading fluency score. So when that's the first time kids see a passage of words and they have to read that. Kindergarten, they're still measuring discrete skills. So the phoneme segmentation, letter naming, sounds. And so like some of that gap is because it's a very new measure. And so being a reader, honestly, is something that we're gonna keep a better eye on now that we have that across both buildings, and to see how do they come in to first grade and are being a reader data. Because at Ames Web, there is a little bit of difference with what you're actually measuring in those students. Any other questions?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Well, good evening.
Evening.
So thanks for having me here this evening. It's kind of fun to be able to talk about all the amazing teachers and staff at LES and all the work that they've done. And we can go to the next slide. I have the first big report card, right? So state testing starts in 3rd and 4th grade. But I think it's always important to point out that this isn't just reflective of LES. This is K-UP, right? This is all of the work that's been done by the teachers and intervention specialists and staff and families and community that bring us to this point. But in fact, our 8-year-olds take a state test. So there's that. I have to put on my glasses because I can kind of see up there and I can't see down here without these. So I'll take them on and off. Maybe you can relate. So we can go to the next slide. The first one we're going to talk about is the achievement score. We got a 5 here. This really is looking at that point in time. Where did they score? There are 5 main categories, with the top being advanced. That advanced plus that you see up there is the handful of kids that we have taking out of level tests. So we have a couple of 3rd graders who take 4th grade math, a couple of 4th graders who take 5th grade math, and they are so smart, they're scoring advanced anyway. So that's called advanced plus. So we have those top 2 categories really are advanced and accomplished. Proficient is still passing the test. Basic and limited, they did not pass. All right, we can go to the next one. So when you're looking at this pie chart here, you're really looking at the culmination of all of the tests. We're looking at 3rd and 4th grade scores. We're looking at math and reading. So this represents about 1,100 points of scores here on this pie chart. And I think what's pretty impressive and amazing to look at is that top category, the yellow there, the advanced, 43% of our kids are scoring in the top category. If you add in the next one, which is accomplished, you're adding 25% more kids. So in Loveland, you have 68% of the kids scoring at the highest 2 categories, which is pretty remarkable and a real testament to the core instruction that happens daily in Loveland. And remember that number because we'll come back to how achievement kind of impacts something else. But the 68% having that many at that high of a level is really impressive. So got the 5 there. We can go to the next one, gap closing. Kevin touched on this a little bit. Gap closing is really taking all of your subgroups and you want all of them to be succeeding equally. So you're really looking at the different subgroups that are listed, and we want to make sure that everyone is achieving and growing in the same equitable way. So if you look at the next slide, I think that this one is really interesting. The 5-star, you needed 60%. So to get 60%, you can tell how hard the category is because you only need 60% to get to the 5-star, right? And we had 82.4. So they were kind of blowing that out of the water. And we look at all of the different categories up there. And this is really, we're looking at those subgroups. Are they scoring and performing well? And are they growing well? Again, there is the one gifted ID and services. We improved from the last report card, but the cutoff score also increased. Went from a 70% to an 80% to get that score. So while we improved, we didn't improve enough to get the 5 points. And Stacy can dig deeper into that if you have questions on that piece of it. The next one is progress. Progress is a metric where we look at third grade scores. And they take all those third grade scores and they put it in their magic little silo and they put together all these numbers and they have a predicted score for how they're supposed to do in fourth grade. And what we want to look at is our kids growing 1 year's time, growing 1 year's growth in 1 year's time. So we, at a minimum, want that 3 because that tells us we are growing our kids adequately. But we hit the 4, which is pretty exciting, which shows that there's significant evidence that we exceeded student growth expectations. And if you think back to that achievement slide, where we have 68, almost 70% of our kids already scoring at the highest points, that is not a tough task, or that is a tough task to hit that growth measure and the progress. Because when you have kids who are already scoring in the 90th percentile, and you've got to keep them there and nudge them a little bit higher, that's no easy task. So really proud of that 4 stars there. Would love to have the 5, but I also see that achievement of how high our kids already are. That's going to make it tough to move to that 5 stars in that one. Early literacy, Kevin touched a little bit on that. We get all 3 of them. We get the proficiency, the promotion, and the improving, and you can see that they're weighted a little differently. Here on the 40% on the proficiency in third grade, that score is an 82.7. That's up 5 points from the previous year. The promotion is 100% with the 35% weight. And then if you look at the improving K-3 literacy, that says 25 out of 52 moved off from off track to on track. Again, as Kevin mentioned, that's a tough thing to do, to move half your kids to on track. To add to the joy and pleasure of that measure, our kids are taking a test in the fall that says they're off track, which is a diagnostic that's state approved, but it's a diagnostic. And to get on track, it's the OST. So not apples to apples, right? And a much tougher metric to get to that. So that, I think, you know, we look at achievement and that's that testament to really strong core instruction. We look at this score here, that's a really strong testament to our intervention that's going on, because that's a tough one to get. So it breaks it down in the next category. Still had 4 stars, would love to get that up. But again, when you look at the metric of going from a diagnostic to an OST, that's a really tough get. But they're doing great with it. So the next one, I have iReady. As Kevin mentioned, we're new to this. We're new to iReady. We had MAP for about a decade. You heard us bring our MAP scores and talk to you about MAP. MAP is a little different in that MAP is a benchmarking program where you take a benchmark 3 times a year and you get pretty stagnant data. And it gave us good data, but it was nothing past that. Where iReady is more of a diagnostic approach. So they take 3 diagnostics throughout the year. And from that diagnostic, the next minute that they're done, they're put into a MyPath where they can work on remediation, enrichment, specific core things that they need to be working on. So it's giving our teachers a ton of feedback, a ton of data that they can use in their instruction. And so I too am new at iReady, but I thought I'd take a shot at a few of the pieces of data that I found that I thought were pretty interesting. We, as Kevin said, we have our PD coming up on March 7th, so I'll learn a little bit more, but I brought a few. If you can see that microscopic stuff up there, I'll tell you what it says. So when they take the diagnostic in the fall, again, there's a magic number that's created that would be for their typical growth that they would get at the end of the year. So on the iReady reports, there'll be a typical growth line and there'll be a stretch goal. So the typical growth goal is what we want them to hit by the end of the year. The stretch goal is for the superhuman kids. They're going to really reach that stretch goal. And the typical growth, we want to hope to get there. Well, if you take a look, we were kind of blown away at what happened when we ran our first reports. So over on the left, you see it says progress to annual typical growth. The median there would be about 50. We're hitting 50% of our annual growth goal. Well, our kids hit 145% of that. So that's not kids' performance, that's the progress towards the goal. So what that does is now that kicks them into stretch goal because we made so much progress towards our typical growth goal that they're now in their stretch growth goal, which was amazing to us. And if you look over here in this quadrant, you can see when you have a quadrant that the bottom is the performance, the left is the growth. And in the quadrant, you always want to be in that upper right, which is high performance, high growth. those two blue dots above the high performance and high growth that are kind of off the charts, that's our third and fourth graders in reading. I was blown away. And I'll tell you, iReady is very rigorous. I don't know if any of your kids have come home and said, dude, they hit some hard stuff in that, especially the math. It's crazy. I would have to phone a friend on a lot of them. But those were our two dots for where we fell in our growth and performance. So we were pretty excited about that. And again, it's giving constant feedback to our teachers for them to be able to make some instructional decisions.
Are you saying there are integrated tools in this as well for them so that as
Yeah.
something comes up that's like,
Yep.
it's plugged in right there, ready?
You
to
got
go?
it. So they can look at reports as the kids are working through their MyPath, which is personalized instruction for each kid. And as they go on, teachers can see how did they do on that lessons. Teachers can say they're on their MyPath going along, doing some things that the program has said they need remediation or enrichment on. But teachers can also say, well, right now, we're going to be working on fractions on a number line. So I'm going to pull some kids who maybe need some more help with that. I can assign them something with that and they can work on it. So it's giving them real-time feedback that they can look at. And we're not experts at it yet because we're new to it, but hopefully the PD will continue to show us how we can really best utilize those reports. So it's been great. I kind of put it in the next one. If you look, this is kind of the intervention cone that Kevin was talking about. His was a bar graph and these are cones. And again, in a perfect world, your tiered cones look at 5, 15, 80. And what's shown here is you can see under grade 3, there's on the right, it's kind of shaded out and it says diagnostic 1 underneath it. And to the left, it says diagnostic 2. So your goal is always to shrink the red and grow the green. And so you can see that in grade 3, we went from 18% to 6%. We grew our tier 1 from 58 to 86, and tier 2 was 24 to 8. Like I really was blown away by these numbers. I wasn't expecting it because of the rigor of the program. Truly, our kids just did such a great job. You can see it in 4th grade as well. And then I also have it for math. I won't go through all of them, but same kinds of thing. The median is 50, where we would expect to be. We're at 73. Kids are already hitting that growth goal for the year and they're into their stretch goal. We're in our, the right-hand column or the right-hand quadrant is the high performance and high growth. That's 3rd and 4th grade, those 2 blue dots there in that right quadrant. And if you go again, you can see the math. It's not quite as strong as the reading, but if you look at grade 3, we had 23% in the green when we took it, and we're up to 58%. We had 43% in the green, and we're up to 72%. So I just see that green will continue to grow. And so we're still learning about it, but what we've seen, we're pretty excited about. The teachers love that they're able to get that feedback. It is more time intensive, clearly, than MAP was, but it's paying off because it's giving us the data that we need and that they can use right away. And again, all of this that I'm showing you, I get to stand up here and talk, but this is all the teachers and the kids and the families doing all of this and the support from the board and our central office that helps us with everything. So it's fun to stand up here and really brag on what everybody does on a day-to-day basis.
I appreciate it because programs like these can be very difficult for the kids. And when the staff is on board and they're buying into the product, you see that difference with our students. And
Yeah.
I've said before, my son comes home and he's really focused on math. So I definitely saw the improvement on his math scores the second go around. So.
Yeah, and the teachers do a great job with, kind of recognizing they have different ways that they do it. Mr. Price they get to move their piece over when they do however many minutes they have and they're moving it over. So our goal is that they're at about between 30 to 45 minutes is what the program says a week in each subject. So it's not a day, it's just a week. And so a lot of teachers do 3 15-minute segments a week at some point.
But they want to come home and do more,
I know.
which is a good thing.
Other questions for Mrs. Moran? I asked all my hard questions to Kevin, so.
Thanks. I appreciate, I'll let him go first every year.
Well, thanks to both of you for the amazing work that you're doing, for all of your care of our children and implementing new things and making them work. So we appreciate that and making the investments that you do. Thank you.
Just to jump in for Kevin and Jen, I don't think you're going to find two better elementary principals in the state of Ohio. And we are lucky to have them. And you might say you're not an expert on iReady, you're an expert on kids and culture. And their buildings run really, really well. Much thanks to the assistant principals. Katie Cameron's here, and then Jane Miller at LES and the entire staff. We talk about it all the time. We have a very veteran staff. This doesn't happen unless the staff is on board with what we're trying to do, and they love iReady, which tells me it's a pretty good program. So, but thanks to the whole team there.
All right. Jesse.
Well, hello all. Great to see you. I want to piggyback off the report cards a little bit. We can't measure everything in the report card, right? We can't measure culture and PBIS and mental health supports and things like that. So a lot of great work is happening with that too. So we just wanted to take a minute and introduce Darcy Chandler, LPS counselor, who has Jordy with her. If you want to come up, Darcy. In my administrative report that I shared, there was a slideshow. I told Darcy I would just share it with you all instead of asking her to go through it. So check it out. If you have questions, feel free to shoot us an email. But I'll let her talk a little bit about Jordy and just kind of what their plan is with him. Darcy's worked really hard to bring Jordy to LPS, and we were really, really proud of her, and just super excited to have him as part of our team.
Right.
He had puppy energy for a long time, and I feel like he's finally in place to LPS. So he's done a lot of training since he was a puppy. In the past 6 months, I was really motivated. I saw a video of a golden retriever in another local school district, and it's a 10-minute video that just showed the impact that dog had on students and staff. I wanted to be able to do the same thing. So that was my goal. So we have done some training to certify for the Alliance of Therapy Dogs. So we did some additional training over the past 6 months, and then we did test evaluation, practices in nursing homes, depots. We worked really hard since the fall. I really got really good from that video, and that was covered by insurance. And so he started a couple weeks ago. He's been doing introduction visits with every classroom, so he's gotten to see all the students at Loveland Primary School. Got to go to every classroom. We do introductions. We talk about school facilities, what he's here for, why therapy dog is really fun to practice in school. There's a lot of research that shows that dogs can have an effect on anxiety and having connections with kids. Help them de-escalate. It can help kids do the separation anxiety towards and then it needs as an incentive. So with our tiger training folks, PBIS, we have another dog, Sunny, who comes in occasionally, but they are used as a reward for the buy time with the dogs. So he's being used as an incentive along with Sunny, who will probably be used more as incentives with classrooms. Even with readers who are struggling, we'll have to read a lot of books. So we have lots of plans for Dory, but right now it's just kind of settling in. It comes with me twice a week. Kids are already showing them so much love. So it's been really special a couple weeks. Kind of what we so yeah, if you have any questions about Dory or goals with Dory,
I think it's great. I was telling John that in the regional counselor meeting that we run, that was the topic of discussion. So they're bringing it in at all grade levels through various schools. And when I heard we were doing it, I thought, this is wonderful. And the kids will love it. I really do think it'll make a
Just one thing
difference.
to add to that is we did give families the option to opt out.
Okay.
They do not have to participate if, they have allergies or fear or whatever reason. I don't think anyone actually has opted out, but they do have that option.
I would just say, Darcy, thank you. It probably seemed like it was a ridiculous amount of hoops to jump through.
And it
No
was.
pun, I guess, but there was no question. I think it's going to be great for the kids, and you did not have to do it, and you did. And I appreciate it very much. I was at Home Depot this past weekend. If Jordy can handle Home Depot, he's going to be.
Yeah.
On that slideshow, I had two weeks that we started, and there's awesome pictures of kids and kids, but also for our staff. I mean, I have so many staff members just coming by and say hi, get some love, and it kind of just helps them. That staff members come in and talk to me, and like, pet party, love on party, not the pet day or whatever, so not only for the students, but for our staff.
That's fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming and sharing. We appreciate that. Sounds like he's gonna be a busy dog.
We're not by the end of the day.
Kevin, I think the students turning in their tickets to eat lunch with you might go down.
All right, excellent. All right, I believe then we'll move on to our number 3.2, our governor's state budget proposal. Yeah, that's usually just information. Yeah, do we, that is true though. Usually aren't the students' reports
Yeah.
before,
They normally are, yes.
yeah.
Right after that.
You guys are on. Welcome back. Amend the agenda. Okay,
Hi, it's been a minute since I've
hold
been up
on,
here.
one second then. Sorry.
These are informational, so I don't believe you need to
Yeah,
amend
okay.
the agenda.
Yeah.
There's no action. If there were action being taken, I would say we should, but
Yeah.
these are informational items.
Great. Well, welcome back. We're glad to have you all back with us tonight. It's been a while since you've been here, so we forgot what we're doing. We're glad you're here and please.
I'm
continue your
Lily.
report.
I'm doing the report on LECC for this month. They've had a lot of tests, and I think that was touched on with our earlier reports. It's able to determine their growth and their readiness to continue on to the next grade. Down at LECC, they've done their iReady test for the middle of the year. We saw those benchmarks there for reading and math. The teachers down there, they take the results and they analyze them to adjust their teachings and to allow iReady to help each of their students. Additionally, the benchmark reading assessments were completed in late January, which are designed to measure student growth from the beginning of the year until now. Data meetings were then organized to analyze the collective results and plan for the future teaching plans. That's very similar to iReady. Finally, as far as tests go, LECC preschoolers took the Winter Early Learning Assessment for ELA, which again determines their readiness for kindergarten. LECC kindergarten registration is open. To ensure a full day spot for kindergarten, parents are encouraged to enroll by May 1st. There are 3 different registration nights. For more information, those dates can be found on Loveland's website. Before I go, I'll take a moment to mention upcoming events. March 7th is Teacher In-Service Day, so there's no school for students. The book fair happens between March 17th and 21st, and March 27th starts spring break. 22nd, not 27th. Thank you.
Thank you.
Be over there. My days are numbered as a student rep, so I figured I'd show out for the last couple months, if you will. Anyways, I have the LPS and the LES report in front of me. So first, we'll discuss some ongoing building projects. All our students K through 4 completed their benchmark reading assessments. We heard about that already from Mr. Fancher and Ms. Vaughan, so I won't harp too much on that. But these are a great way for our staff to set in place plans for our students and really like control the sample size. So they can individualize it or they can make it a grade-wide thing. So this is definitely something important for our teachers. We have begun planning for next school year. I know it sounds crazy, but we're almost there. So teams, our building leadership teams have already begun to plan for next school year. So we are getting ahead of it. And then LPS and LES teachers have completed their data reviews, and they are going to create plans for intervention and enrichment where needed. Next, we'll move into some updates. Conferences took place on February 6th for select teachers and parents. Students had their Valentine's Day party on Valentine's Day, February 14th. And then students have kicked off their magazine sale fundraiser, which will continue until the 28th, so the end of the month. Next, we have some accomplishments. The 100th day of school celebration was at the beginning of February. So like I said, we're almost there, just a little farther. And then a professional development update. Mr. Fancher and Ms. Foreign they hosted a principal cohort meeting recently, and then they will be attending a learner conference at the Springer School in Cincinnati. And then finally, our next in-service day is at the beginning of March. So we'll spend time on dyslexia and students with trauma as well. And then finally, I wanted to give a student's perspective. So Luis and I we were able to sit on a panel for the Step Up Day. The 8th graders came up to the high school to kind of learn a little bit about how we do things up there. And so Luis and I were fortunate enough to answer some questions that the 8th graders had for about 20, 30 minutes. So I think it was a great way to give them an opportunity to get in the building because it's stressful, right? I think that's the biggest transition is 8th grade to high school. So giving the kids the option to explore the halls, meet the kids, meet the teachers, I think that's a great way, something that our district does so well, which is the transition from 8th grade to high school and hopefully keeping more students in Loveland. I know I need to tread lightly there, but keeping more students in our great school district than transferring maybe to private schools for high school. So thank you guys.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Ronan Wolfer, and I'm giving the February report for the LIS and LMS campus. I'll start off with map testing. All the middle school campus took map testing to inform placement in the scheduling process and measure learning. They also started scheduling. So 6th graders scheduled for 7th grade and learned how to make a 7-bell schedule. And 8th graders met administrators and student panel at Step Up Day, like CJ said, to learn more about the high school. The spelling bee also took place this past week. The LIS winner was Lila Smith and the LMS winner was Annie Dickman. 7th grade, as part of the scheduling process, the 7th grade had a family welcome. So 6th grade parents could attend a presentation to help their middle schoolers transition into 7th grade. The LMS teachers attended the first annual Middle Level High Aims Symposium, and I'd like to shout out 8th grade English teacher, Mr. Myris, for his presentation at the symposium. The 6th grade student council and Nick Connor planned an event with 300 plus students in attendance, the 3rd annual LIS Silent Disco, which was a great success for the student body. The families met with teachers to learn about student growth, needs, and support during the LIS winter conferences to give help to teachers in the following year. And the dodgeball tournament took place in LIS last week and is taking place in LMS this week, which is raising money for Nest. The 5th graders took part in the Read Bowl. So teacher teams competed for the most reading time in a week, with the Cones Barber team winning with over 3,300 minutes read each week last month. The 7th grade girls basketball team went 19-0 for a perfect season and took the ECC championship. The PBIS Positive Behavior and Intervention Supports continues recognition for students and celebrated their core values, care, respect, and responsibility with the trip to Scene 75. And I'd just like to say overall, the LMS and LIS schools have been doing a great job in keeping their students active and have been really busy over the past month in keeping engagement high.
Thank you.
As Ellie has gone up, I will congratulate Roden. The indoor track team went down to Louisville. He qualified for the state of Ohio indoor track meet, correct? Congratulations.
Okay, hi, I'm Ellie. I was given a visual for my presentation, and I think it was supposed to be some like dramatic unfurl thing, but that's not really me. So we got 5 stars, y'all. So I did not receive a report this week, but I will read from the letter that we got. So the overall 5-star award recognizes those who consistently give their all to creating an engaging learning environment that fosters growth, collaboration, and success. I commend you and your team for your dedication to providing students with the tools they need to excel academically and personally. Your work will have a lasting impact on the lives of your students. So some beautiful words for our teachers, our staff. They've been doing an amazing job. And something that I find important to reiterate is when we look at the younger grades and we talk about reading and how much that impacts them, taking that into the high school and making sure that we are sticking with that and working on our reading skills is so important. And I think that it sometimes gets lost with the younger grades. So encouraging that so when we go to college, we can continue. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks.
Thank you.
Ellie, any reflections on your time in the board office? Thing you want to report to us?
Mm-hmm.
It's
They-
been great.
All right, good. Nice. Excellent. Thank you. Thanks for your work there as well.
Sorry, Ellie, just to pile on. So what are you doing with the Throwback Thursday? Do we get to make fun of people and put them up on the walls all around the school?
No, just post. Although I will say.
All right, well, thanks to all 4 of you, and you are certainly welcome to stay, but if you need to get going and get some homework done, we certainly understand that as well. So thanks for your reports.
He's like, great.
I warned him. I warned him.
All right, so now we are ready for 3.2. Thank you all for keeping me on track there and getting our students in there. The governor's state budget proposal.
Thank you, President Eilert, members of the board. Happy to present this to you this evening, although I'm not happy with how it looks. So I'll take you through the governor's budget proposal. I do want to offer this before we start. I've never seen a governor's budget proposal, the first budget proposal, be the finishing product when a budget is adjusted or approved, I would say. I do say that to say the sky is not falling. However, this first proposal did leave something to be desired with what we were able to see with our funding. When we look at what Governor DeWine proposed, it was basically proposing a 5% reduction in guarantee funds next fiscal year, and then a 10% reduction the following fiscal year. And this would essentially be reducing the guarantee, which is one of the items that our school funding committee has identified as something to protect, which we'll get to that, and I'll let Mr. Broadwater talk about that a little bit more later. But this would essentially affect 56% of Ohio school districts. And something that is really concerning to us is that Loveland City School District already receives 85% less in per pupil funding. And we're talking about a reduction of that. As our community pays taxes and sends them up to Columbus, it's definitely a concern that we would be negatively impacted even further with a per pupil funding basis. When we look at the effect on the 5-year forecast, this is our cash balance line. We were essentially looking at a $5 million cash balance in fiscal year 29 based off of the November 5-year forecast. This leaves us about a $2.6 million cash balance if this were to be put into place. And you can see here the actual numbers broken out. So it negatively impacts our cash balance by about $2.5 million. And that's, again, the concern that we have. There are districts that are on the guarantee that are spending higher than the average and per pupil costs, but we're not one of those districts. We're actually below the average. So again, this seems kind of like a one-size-fits-all reduction to the guarantee that is not necessarily advantageous to us. And when we look at our effect on cash days, and this is important because this does trigger the cash policy that you approved earlier this fiscal year. But as you see, it doesn't really affect when we would trigger the 90 days, but it does make us worse off by 10 days. Are there any questions on that piece of it thus far? I will say that a simulation was released. I believe my numbers are more accurate because this is actually taking into account our enrollment numbers and our projections, and also DPIA funding and the fully phased in Fair School Funding Plan. I do want to also recognize that this proposal did fully fund the Fair School Funding Plan. So while there is motion down on the reduction of the guarantee, there's an increase to the overall funding in the 5 categoricals where we can increase as a guarantee district.
But that increase is on the fiscal 22.
Correct. It's on fiscal year 22 cost model, and there's no update to the base cost, which is essentially the multiplier that all that works off of. If there are no questions, I'll turn it over to Mr. Broadwater to kind of outline the school funding committee and our takeaways and our steps forward.
Thank you, Mr. Espy. Again, just to update the board on our school funding committee and where we're going. First thing I wanted to do was show 4 years ago when we developed the strategic vision, we could see that this community was in a little bit of confusion on how state funding worked. And so part of what the community asked us to do through the strategic vision under 4A with community engagement, strategy number 1 is educate stakeholders about Ohio's school funding system, focus on funding sources and rules. And so our state funding committee ties right into that goal that we noticed from day one here. Under 4B, and a lot of these strategies fit, but number 1, advocate for solutions to Loveland's unique state funding challenges. And that's what we're trying to do with our committee. And I'll use an expression Mr. Espy says, we don't want to just admire the problem, we want to figure out how we can make it better. And so we're trying to do that with the committee. On the next slide, the funding committee, just real quick review. Superintendent treasurer developed a plan to engage and educate the community about state funding. We also asked for community members to join a state funding committee. So that went out. Anybody who wanted to volunteer to be a part of the committee had that opportunity. We had about 50 individuals that volunteered their time to be a part of the committee. Last year, we held three meetings. Meeting 1 was March 18th, introduction to the state funding model, so almost a year ago. And then April 10th, it was a little deeper dive into Loveland specifics where John went through a lot of that. And then May 8th, discussing statewide strategy and like districts that we had identified as like districts. So in about a year after that, I'm just going to review kind of what we've done up to this point and next steps. The first thing I put on the next slide was we did last year in March, there was a state legislative meeting that I believe Ms. Manga and Mr. Eilert Mr. SB, myself, and Mr. Setters attended. We did meet with Senators Johnson and Wilson and Representative Baker to give them a Loveland informational sheet about state funding and how difficult it is for our community. And it is difficult for our community the way the state funding is set up, simply because we are identified as a wealthy district based on their metrics. So the next slide, kind of the next steps to advocate for Loveland City Schools. We recently, last week, sent out a letter to all of our local legislators, and we stated our district funding concerns, and we have requested a meeting to discuss those with each of those. So you have Senators Wilson and Johnson. We also sent a letter to Senator Blessing, who is very involved in state funding for education, and I would say is an advocate in some regards. The representatives that the letters were sent to were Representatives Schmidt, Teska, and Brownlee. And I would say if our community members are concerned about where this state budget and state funding is going, those are the individuals that can make a difference for us here in Loveland. And we'll be letting our community know maybe some of the things they can do to not admire the problem, but maybe make it better. So we're going to meet with the State Funding Committee on March 10th. We're going to develop next steps in regards to getting the community at large involved, which is what we just said with perhaps that means letters, whatever that means, whatever the State Funding Committee comes up with. We are going to go back to the state legislator breakfast February 20, or this is a different breakfast, on February 24th, 21st at the Hamilton County Educational Service Center. We are then going to go to the same state legislator meeting on March 18th, discuss the concerns we have. We'll have a different informational sheet that I'll show here in a minute. And we are going to try and set up some meetings with legislators while we're up there. We'll see what we can do with that. And then lastly, we have developed a one-page document to state the three concerns we have identified with state funding. The next slide will show you the first half. We went half and half so you could read it. But the above average results, below average costs, I think says everything we need to say in regards to Loveland City School District. As you heard our principals discussing tonight, we do very, very well. Our students do very well because of our community, our parents, our staff, and because of how the district is run by our administrators. And so we had a 5-star in every category. 97% of other districts in the state of Ohio did not. We're the top 3%. The piece of data that John had mentioned, $4,250 is how much we receive from the state per pupil. 85% of the districts in the state of Ohio receive more. And so we are in the top 3%, bottom 15% when it comes to state funding. And to me, I think if I were a community member or somebody that this is affecting, I would want to make sure that we're doing everything we can, that the state of Ohio knows that this may not be on an even playing field. The other piece of the data that we have there, 75% of the districts have more administrative support per student. 97% of the districts in the state of Ohio have more teacher support per student. And we are below average when it comes to expenditures per pupil, and we are at 55%. So I think it would be hard to look at this data and say that you don't have above average results with below average costs. I think that's where we are. We're looking for some help from our state legislators to ease the burden on the community members. So the next slide, the 3 steps that the funding committee, Mr. SB, and the board have come up with. One is to protect the guarantee, making sure that we can continue with the guarantee that we're receiving. As you heard John talk about, Governor DeWine is not necessarily doing that. It's not the final say. So we're hoping that with conversations with legislators, we can protect the guarantee. 2, fully implement the Fair School Funding Plan, which I believe is in the works. And then 3, increase the state share minimum to 20%. And Mr. SB, I'll let you explain that a little bit more if you would like. But those are the 3 asks that when we visit legislators, we would visit. So.
Yeah, so again, the 5 categorical funding parts of the funding plan where we can actually increase our funding on the guarantee are affected by the state share minimum. We're currently at 10%, which is the bare minimum that any district can be funded at. It used to be 5%, so we're hopeful that we can get some momentum to move that up to 20%. That would affect other local districts like Madeira. I also believe it would affect Indian Hill, Sycamore as well. So that's something that if we can get to 15%, we would see a $500,000 increase. And if we could get to 20%, we would see another $1 million per year. So those are things that we've identified, and I think that they're attainable. I think that they are certainly not pie in the sky things. I think that they're very real and very tangible. And that was something that when we set out with the school funding committee, was trying to identify things that are achievable. And I think that this would be a step in the right direction for the Fair School Funding Plan and school funding in the state of Ohio as a whole. So, any questions?
To the board, I did give every member this information sheet. We will ask our state funding committee. We'll show that to them, see if there's any adjustments they want to make to that before we put it out.
You know, I think when we look at this and think about where Loveland has been over the last 10 years or so, we had a lot of emphasis looking at locally, what are the things that we can do to reduce costs? And we've made so many strides to continue to reduce incrementally our costs. And we were looking at this next levy thinking about, okay, maybe we can even push back the next time we have to ask voters by another year, given some of the savings that we've been able to have. If this moves forward as it is and our funding is further reduced by the state, it essentially wipes out all of those savings that we made in the last few years and will bring us back to those voters sooner. And so I think one of the things we want to make sure we communicate to voters is that we know you are concerned about the tax dollars that you pay every year and how those have continued to increase, and that another levy will increase those further in terms of the support for the school. But as we look at these numbers and think about all the things we've done to reduce, and we'll continue to look for those, there are fewer and fewer places to find those within the district funds. And they need to come from the state. And so the best thing our constituents can do here in Loveland is to advocate for more funding from the state. And that's why at the top of that page, why the 4250, 85% of districts receiving more state funding than students. It's why we put that in the bold orange, because we think that's such an important number for our folks to lift up to our legislators and let them know that, as John was saying, we think about the fact that we're all paying what we need to in our state taxes as well, and for that many more of those dollars to go out to other communities, and for us to potentially be even hurt further in terms of our funding support from the state, that we need to continue as a whole community to advocate for that with our legislators. So very hopeful that folks will join us. Thank you to our administration and all the things that you have done to put the committee together. And to bring focus to this for Mr. Setters and all the communication that he's done to give us clear communication about what it is that's before us in terms of the challenge, so that we can equip folks to be good advocates for our community. Any other comments from board members about this proposed budget from the governor and how it affects Loveland?
My only comment is when I first joined the board, there was a lot of controversy about how much money Loveland was spending educating its students and on the backs of its taxpayers. And this is a perfect opportunity for those taxpayers to go back and say, look, Loveland is spending significantly more amount on the backs of its citizens because the state isn't funding it. And the state is yet again saying that they don't have enough money to fund it and that the citizens should pay more. This is the only chance that as a citizen you get to speak to the state. We've done a lot of groundwork to try to give an easy, clear message about how much Loveland and districts like Loveland are being disfavored by the current model. So again, we've done great work. I would only suggest that we continue to make sure to get the message out that we can't do it by ourselves, but that our community needs to also make sure that their representatives hear what their concerns are.
I think at the highest level, you know, from just looking for the entire state, you know, there's two words that come to mind is access. So we want to make sure that all kids in Loveland, all kids across the state have access to quality public education. The second is that, and you hear it in our administrative reports on the report card, is that we want to make sure our kids are growing. So wherever they are in their academic journey, that they have solid growth. So it's access and growth, high quality growth for the kids of the state. It's very frustrating when I see that from a state perspective, over the last 20 years, the state of Ohio was 35th in state funding per public education per pupil, and the state of Ohio has dropped to 45th. So I think that the message from everybody that's spoken is that it is the time to speak up to our state legislators and talk to them about that we, for our community, value access to quality public education for the children of our communities. So I appreciate all the work that's been done, but we need to really speak up so that we can have a positive impact.
If you think about looking at the math, if Ohio is 45th out of 45th out of 50 states, and Loveland is in the bottom 15% of that state, where does that put us? And that is not a good place to be. But so it is going to be up to the community and us, and to make sure we communicate as much as we can.
Great. Thanks. Next on our agenda is the board president report. Anything from Great Oaks to report this?
Last week I had a Great Oaks board meeting. Closing for the deadline of applications was on February 4th. Students who applied, there was a little over 2,700 students for about 2,095 openings. So it's going to be very tight on who gets in. But the career specialist will be sending out notifications about mid-March to students who applied and are accepted into the programs. We also, as a board, the board a resolution in support of Ohio Fair's school funding plan and urging the 136th General Assembly to implement the final phase. Sums it up.
Thanks.
Mhm.
Communications committee, right?
Well, we just had a communications committee. I'll come back to that in just a minute. Just wanted to give an update. I think since the last meeting, we had the Loveland Schools Foundation had the distinguished alumni and faculty event at the 1859. Dr. Swetsnow, Mrs. Jeranek, Broadwater, and Mr. Espy were all there. It was a great night. So it was awesome to recognize Nick Jackson, who speaks, has spoken to our students many times. Just great motivational speaker and really believes in the power of loving in your community well. And then we also honored George Littoral, who was a retired Army, tremendous in public servant and career in safety. And they had never met each other, but they went to the high school the Friday of the event and got to know each other and had just a beautiful moment saying Amazing Grace to us. So it was really just a cool moment. And then we got to honor the memory of Mr. Kenyon, as well as Linda Schlusher as our first two distinguished faculty. So the school foundation is partnering with Tigers Inc. and the Green Team at the high school to raise funds for the Steve Kenyon Outdoor Memorial Classroom. So hopefully people have seen information about that, but they have a pretty big fundraising goal in order to do that. So more to come on that. Just from a legislative committee perspective, we haven't had a committee meeting yet, but just obviously paying a lot of attention to the state budget. And then we've been talking through our policies. And then we just had a communications committee meeting, and we were talking about what we just talked about with the state funding, advocacy rolling out, as well as making sure the online scorecard that we have for our strategic plan, that we're marketing that, and making sure that we're staying current with our communication to all of our current parents and community members, as well as prospective.
From a legislative standpoint too, just continue to encourage folks to be vocal as well about potential changes to the Department of Education nationally and what that could potentially do to funding for particularly our most vulnerable student populations, and the potential burden that would place upon us to fund those important programs that we have to support those students. So that's going to be another important place that we maintain our focus to make sure that we can fund some really important programs for our kids that need them the most. Anything else from any
Oh,
board members?
community advisory team. Sorry. Had a moment there visualizing the agenda, Andrew, from our meeting. So we did have our CAT meeting last week, where Mr. Lee and Mr. Mitchell talked about our career paths, just tremendous. The kids came, we had middle schoolers, high schoolers talking about their experience, as well as some of our business leaders. I think it was a fantastic meeting. And then we have our next community advisory meeting coming up in March or April. March, and we're going to be talking about facilities as well as school funding.
All right. Then next on our agenda is a board resolution for OHSAA membership. We've got the resolution right here in our agenda. This is something we have to do every year, but something that obviously we've been a part of for many, many years. Do we have a motion to approve our Ohio High School Athletic Association membership for 25-26?
Second.
Roll call, please.
Dr. Swetchino,
Yes.
Mrs. Washburn,
Yes.
Reverend Eilert,
Yes.
Mrs. Jarnick,
Yes.
Mrs. Mangan.
Yes.
All right, and then next on the agenda is the approval of Board of Education policies. We had our policy meeting last month. At our previous meeting, at the beginning of this month, we looked through these policies as a board as the first reading. There were several policies that we pulled forward in that meeting that we wanted to get implemented. So we waived the first reading, but these are those that we did not waive the first reading. There are lots of policies. I'm not going to read all of the letters as those that are presented. So any questions, comments on the policies as presented? All right, then we have a motion to approve the policies as presented.
So moved.
Second.
And a roll call, please.
Mrs. Washburn,
Yes.
Reverend Eilert,
Yes.
Mrs. Jarnick,
Yes.
Mrs. Mangan,
Yes.
Dr. Swetchino.
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah. Lynn wanted me to add some new letters in as I listed them, but decided not to do that. Keep it above board there as presented. All right. Then Mr. Collier is not here today. We're glad that he's with his family celebrating a milestone for one of his kids. And so Mr. Broadwater is going to present our Assistant Superintendent for HR report.
All right, I took the liberty to grab the FTE chart, change all the colors and all the numbers, and jiggle it all up. But now Garth's with his family, so I'll be happy to present. I'll give you a few highlights here. The first three under retirement. I think it's important that we recognize those that are retiring. We have Steve Adams at the high school, who is a math teacher. 15 years of service at Loveland City School District. If you know Mr. Adams, you know he is one of the most genuinely nice people that you will meet, extremely professional, willing to do anything and everything. And I could give example after example of what that means. But if you look at a servant leader, Steve Adams is that. And so while we're extremely happy for Steve and his family, where he can spend some time with his grandchildren, we are going to miss Steve. It's going to be a loss in the math department, but we congratulate Steve and we wish him nothing but the best. The next individual, Deborah Crocker, who has been a special education aide at our primary elementary school campus. She has 22 years of service at Loveland City School District. She also has two daughters that are teachers or work in the district. We have Katie Templey, who is an art teacher at LES, and Amanda Lamonaco, who is a paraprofessional as well. So Deborah not only worked as an aide, she also gave us two other great individuals that work with kids. I talked to her daughter Katie this morning and said, "What do you know about your mom that I don't know?" And she said that Debbie, while she was a mom and did not work until Katie and Amanda got to the schools, she was never home because she was always working with our students before she was an employee. She was in the schools and helping out kids. And Deborah Crocker is one of those individuals that doesn't need a lot of attention, but when they retire, you notice a hole in the building because of everything that she does and just gives with her heart. And so we congratulate Deborah, and again, we will miss her greatly. Last, but certainly not least, Liesel Roeder, who is a sixth grade teacher at LIS. She has 32 years of service at Loveland, and she was teaching at LIS when this building was built. So she has been, I guess, a cornerstone of LIS all that time, and just does a fantastic job with our students, and she will be greatly missed as well. But we congratulate her as well, the other two individuals that are retiring, and we wish them nothing but the best and thank them. A couple other points we have, if you notice under letter B, employment of certified staff, we have Aiden Leonard, who is going to be a teacher at the middle school for social studies. Aiden has been a substitute teacher for us this year, has done a fantastic job, and we are very, very excited that Aiden has selected Loveland. I know the students really enjoy his classroom, and I know the staff is very excited that we as Loveland City School District got a very good teacher. So we're excited for that. Last little highlight, I will tell you that if you look at letter G, employment for classified staff. At the bottom, there's an addition, Thomas Brannick. That is a late addition, and he is going to be at the high school, a special education aide. And the trivia is his wife, Jennifer, is a special education teacher at the high school. So he has decided to join the ranks of the Tigers at the high school. So we say congratulations to him. And with that, the superintendent recommends the board approve the following items from the assistant superintendent of human resources.
Thank you for that report. Who needs Garth? You did a great job.
Oh, that's not nice.
I had to ding him at least one time. Thank you for that report. We will have a chance as the board to recognize all of those retirees at the end of the year as well at our reception time. So we look forward to having as many of them as possible join us so we can say thank you as well for their many years of service. Do we have a motion to approve this report from HR? Roll call, please.
Reverend Eilert,
Yes.
Mrs. Jarnick,
Yes.
Mrs. Mengen,
Yes.
Dr. Swetchenow,
Yes.
Mrs. Washburn.
Yes.
All right, thank you. Now we have our treasurer report.
Thank you, Reverend Eilert, members of the board. I am very happy to introduce to you tonight the very first finance intern from the high school, Luis Saucedo. Luis has been coming over, meeting with me weekly. It's pretty awesome, you know, just having been last Wednesday taking in the CAT team meeting. First of all, it was really nice to just be able to sit back and enjoy it and not be presenting all the finance data. But it was really cool to see everything that's going on, and I'm happy to be a part of that as well with Luis. Fun fact with Luis, I gave him our budget. It was 8,000 lines or something like that in Excel. I said, hey, why don't you take a shot at budgeting for next year? And I didn't really give him any parameters, and he came back with some really awesome stuff. So I can say that some really great things are happening at all of our schools, specifically at the high school. And I do want to thank Mr. Mernan for helping us get set up. But he's had to sit for a little while, so we're gonna get on with this report so we can wrap this thing up. But I'm gonna turn it over to Luis to give you the report on January.
Thank you, Mr. SB, and thank you, members of the board, for having me tonight. I'm just going to briefly go over the January monthly analysis. So we're over halfway through the fiscal year at 7 months in. We're currently seeing that expenditures and revenues are showing a positive impact on the cash balance equal to 0.005% of total forecasted expenditures. And with regards to expenditures, we see that they are only 0.5% higher than forecasted. Salaries and benefits are lower than forecasted, whereas purchase services and all other expenses like audit fees are higher than forecasted. On the other hand, we see that our revenues are 0.004% lower than forecasted, but nonetheless extremely accurate. Local taxes were higher than forecasted, while unrestricted state aid and all other revenue, things like interest income are both lower than forecasted. Lastly, looking at our interest income, we see that our month-to-date interest income is $111,301.94 and $606,030.73 for the fiscal year to date.
Thank you, Luis. I'll get into a little bit more of the January investment analysis. So one thing that you're going to see with Star Ohio from the end of January 24 to the end of January 25, we continue to see interest rates falling. And that's important to our overall investment strategy. We're still heavily invested in commercial paper where we're getting 4.9%. So when you look at that $111,000 we were able to bring in last month, that's substantially higher than what we were bringing in prior to this process. We were bringing in high 60s, low 70s, and now we're at 111,000. So that's very good. Needless to say, we're continuing to work on our investment process because the commercial paper is short term. So I'm continuing to work with Red Tree on how we're going to move forward. But as of right now, we're pulling money typically a couple days before payrolls and before we cut our accounts payable checks. We're pulling that about 2 days before from Star, which is at the lower interest rate. So we're able to continue with the higher interest rate and keeping those funds in commercial paper. So overall, happy with where we're going with this. I'm also happy that we get further and further close. I should say closer and closer to the longer term investments that were locked in at really low interest rates to be able to reinvest that at a higher interest rate, which is great for me and for the district. When we look at ongoing projects, policy updates, I'm expecting a February OSBA release. I also have the trademark policy draft that I'll be bringing to you first through the policy committee and then to the board for a first read at the March 4th meeting. We're hoping to get this OSBA release in the next week so then I can prepare for the policy meeting at the end of the month. We're also continuing to model changes based off of legislative updates. I did want to also say that there are a couple bills that are a little concerning to me that I think that the board should be aware of, as well as our community. Senate Bill 3 and House Bill 30 is talking about a phase down in state income tax to a flat rate. That would, again, take further funds out of the state general fund and likely lead to less funding for schools in the long term. And also Senate Bill 66, modifications to the 20 mil floor calculation. I would, in kind of looking over that, just summaries, it looks like they're trying to lower it down to 18 mils, which would have an impact on a lot of districts in the state. And then also grant writing. So we just talked about, school funding and a budget presentation or a budget proposal from Governor DeWine, but we're continuing to work on grant funding. I meet weekly with our grant writer and kind of work on components of the grants. I also send emails out and request information. I think I sent Stacy like 3 emails today on grants. But it's also great when I'm out in the buildings that teachers will come up and say, hey, I really need to get this. And so I kind of add that to my list. So when we start to see grants, we start to write grants for those specific things. So again, not trying to be a problem admirer. We're trying to increase revenue as well. That's another piece of the puzzle for us. We're also happy to start working on our insurance committee. Information on that's going to be going out this week to set that first committee meeting up. We're going to have quarterly meetings and represent our exempt staff, our admin staff, and then both of our bargaining units. Also, we're going to be utilizing Hub to start to set up education opportunities for our employees that qualify for Medicare to let them know all of those opportunities that they have to see if that's a right choice for them. Maybe, may not be, but they're going to at least be equipped with the knowledge to know. And really happy to continue with Finance Fridays. I feel like my video editing skills are just at the best they've ever been. And I got one done on Saturday and another one done today. So there's going to be one coming out on our bond savings this Friday, and then I have the one for the next in 2 weeks after that, ready to go as well. So if you have anything, and if you're a community member and you have something that you'd like one of the videos to be on, please just let me know and we'll put it in our rotation and continue working on that. But I'll leave with the awesome, actually I got one more slide I forgot about. So working with, it's getting late, so I'll talk faster. Again, financial information. So on the website, we're doing a little bit of a retooling of the treasurer's page. So I'm going to have all of the monthly reports that the board sees under the documents tab that you'll see on the treasurer page. So go to administration and then treasurer and then documents. And then you'll see those pop up. Also forecasts will be there, bid documents will be there. And then all the Finance Friday videos will be there as well. So happy to do that, and I'll leave it with the Finance Friday logo. Any questions?
Do you have enough bandwidth on your site to handle all the traffic you're gonna get for your finance videos if they're all?
We might have to increase some resources, Mr.
All right.
Setters.
I think we'll be okay.
Yeah. I presented to the high school staff, and I said it in jest, but I don't know if this is true, but I think at one point there were like 17 views on the video, and I think I had 3. But I told the high school staff, I was like, I know all the other views came from you. So, but you know, regardless, it's a library. So that's what I'm telling myself at least. You know, I'm putting those out there. I really like how Facebook forces you to watch it when you scroll through. Just give it a like though and share it. That'd be awesome. But I do think it's going to be important to have that library of knowledge that if people want to go out and see it, they can see it. So happy that we've gotten that off the ground.
Thanks to John putting all that work in, and people won't want to see it until they want to see it. And when things get more important to them, then they'll watch. It'll be good to have that library. So thanks to John.
I was just going to jump on and say the exact same thing. As self-deprecating as you are about the 17 views, people will be interested when they're interested, and that'll be when Loveland School District is saying, hey, we need to think about doing a levy again. All of these questions have come up over and over, and they will again. So it's great to have that resource to point people to.
Thank you.
All right, do we have a motion then to accept the financial reports for January 2025?
So moved.
Roll call, please.
Mrs. Jernick,
Yes.
Mrs. Mangan,
Yes.
Dr. Swetchino.
Yes.
Mrs. Washburn,
Yes.
Reverend Eiler.
Yes. Thank you. Thanks again, Luis, for being here today and for presenting. It's a much more interesting report with you here. Appreciate that. Well done. All right.
Thanks.
Then we still have a few more treasurer items. The Tax Incentive Review Council appointment.
Yeah, so you've already done this. You did it at the organization meeting, but Claremont County would like a specific resolution. So that's what this is.
Would someone like to move the following
moved.
resolution? Thank you. Roll call, please.
Mrs. Mangan,
Yes.
Dr. Swetchino.
Yes.
Mrs. Washburn, Reverend Eiler.
Yes.
Mrs. Jernick.
Yes.
Thank you. And we have a donation to approve. Again, continued support by the Watts family for the Feed the Kids Fund. We have a motion to receive and this donation.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Mrs. Mangan,
Yes.
Dr. Swetchino.
Yes.
Mrs. Washburn,
Yes.
Reverend Eiler.
Yes.
Mrs. Jernick.
Yes.
Just want to again thank the Watts family.
Appreciate their support.
All right, then we've got 6.4 approved bid results for the Loveland Middle School Auditorium HVAC HAU replacements. I asked Mr. Bryant to come forward to share that, and maybe he'll say a little bit about the Facilities Friday videos he's going to be doing too, to compete with the.
Careful, camera. First of all, good evening, and thank you for giving me just a couple minutes. Happy to report that we had a successful and comprehensive bid process to replace the air handler unit that will serve the Loveland Middle School Intermediate Auditorium and Stage area. Just a brief timeline, started work on this in late October, publicly bid in December. We did have a couple of weather impacts. If I don't remember, the foot of snow does slow some things down, especially when you're wanting to get on a roof. But we had a project walkthrough mid-January, and then we had a bid opening towards the end of January on January 27th. The bids opening summary, we had 6 total bids that were given to us. I can list, I believe you have those in front of you. The range of the bids were from $458,900 on the high end to the low end of $295,000. Specifications outlined in the bid process were scope of work and 2 important parts, the decibel readings for both units, with them being above an auditorium, and they will need to run during performances, and then the additional structural fortifications needed in the auditorium to make sure it's safe. And then it also, the bids also were asked to include the recommended equipment. The manufacturer is Daikin, D-A-I-K-E-N, which was the only manufacturer that had the decibel levels where we would have wanted them to be for use in that area. At this point before you, you have what was the low bid of $295,000, and we're seeking, is my recommendation, our recommendation, to seek approval for that from Commercial HVAC, with work being started and completed this summer.
And for our 7 viewers that watch all of our meetings, this is something that we've talked about before. We sent this back out for rebidding after there's some issues with decibel levels in the past. And so thank you for seeing this through. I know this is an important project. Those of us, anyone that's ever been in that auditorium knows this is an important project. And we'll be part of that ongoing work of trying to revamp our auditoriums and make them better spaces for performances. And thanks for all of your work in that area, both at the high school and here on this campus as well.
I'd also like to point out that this is funded with the Permanent Improvement Fund. It's not coming from the general fund, and it's part of our capital plan.
Thank you. Important distinction as well. Thanks. All right. Any other questions, comments from the board? We have a motion then to approve this bid for $295,000 with the attached bid tabulation.
So moved.
All right. When roll call, please.
Dr. Swetchenow?
Yes.
Mrs. Washburn?
Yes.
Reverend Eilert?
Yes.
Mrs. Jarenick?
Yes.
Mrs. Mangan?
Yes.
All right. Thank you. Then we also have a payment in lieu of transportation, which this is another of these. We continue to get these throughout the year, correct?
Yes.
Do we get any more movement on policy there to try to tighten that up, right? Was that a goal?
Yeah, so there are 3 main moving parts, and we're working through that with our legal counsel.
Yep.
So we have a good plan. We're gonna have to tie everyone into it, and it's probably not going to go into effect until next school year. But we have a good plan ahead.
Great. Thank you. We have a motion to approve.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Mrs. Washburn?
Yes.
Reverend Eilert?
Yes.
Mrs. Jarenick?
Yes.
Mrs. Mangan?
Yes.
And Dr. Swetchenow?
Yes.
All right, thank you. Then we come to our motion to adjourn. Second. All in favor, say aye. Any opposed? Meeting adjourned at 7:40 PM.